Okay, so you guys got a handout today. Actually, you got two handouts today, but the one I'm going to talk about right now is assignment 103. This is your next assignment in the series. You had 102 due today. 103 is due on the 9th, which is not this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. So you've got like a week and a half or so. You kind of see that this is the trend. You turn one in, you get the next one. So that's kind of how it's going, and that's how it will end up going for the remainder of the semester. This one, you're going to be working on a lecture series poster. And I kind of hinted at this last lecture when I was referring to lecture series as an example. And so you're going to create a lecture series poster. If you're in the industrial design program or you're more interested on that side of it, do a lecture series for industrial design. If you're interested in architecture, do an architecture lecture series. You can use the lecture series lineup from last spring if you want to do that. You can just repeat it in terms of the architects or whatever. However, you can also invent your complete own lecture series. So I've had people do it with a bunch of dead architects coming back to talk. You could do that if you wanted. So you can be flexible there. But you're going to pick a series of lecturers, and you're going to organize that on a page. And the purpose of this is obviously to attract students to come to the lecture. So your job, in this case, is to get the viewer, the person who's seeing the poster, to want to come to the lecture series. So we're going to talk through today a bunch about typography and font choices and that sort of thing. That will come into play big time in your poster. We'll talk next class on Wednesday about layouts and how you go about laying things out, how do you draw attention to certain elements of your design, and that sort of thing. So the next two lectures will be pretty critical in terms of moving this one forward. You're going to give me a physical print just like you did for your photograph on the first one, your collage on this one. You'll give me another digital print or another physical print. That physical print should be an 11 by 17. So we're not doing it on an 8.5 by 11. We're doing it on the 11 by 17 size, the tabloid size. So it's two of these guys together. So I'll expect the poster on that side. You can do it in portrait. You can do it in landscape. It doesn't make any difference. I think that just about covers it. Any questions on this? It's pretty self-explanatory. If you run into trouble, let me know, and we'll go from there. We'll go over the exercise in a little bit. The other thing I want to tell you all is that you will get your first grade sheet back today. And I usually start the lecture and throw up the slide, but I think it's easier to explain the grade sheet when you have it in front of you and I throw up the slide and we all talk about it together. But since there's people that aren't quite here yet, I'll wait until everybody gets in and do it once. So we'll do that at the end of the lecture. So don't let me forget to give you your grade sheets back because you're going to get that first grade back today. So we're gonna get into the world of typography today, which is actually a completely fascinating subset of graphic design. It's a fascinating subset of design in general. And it's probably something that you will encounter and get in trouble with in like 121, for example. Picking the wrong font is something that likes to be picked on in that class. Although Daniel's not teaching it this year, so maybe you'll get away with something. But typography is really, really important when it comes to graphic design and design in general. We'll talk about that in a bit. So let's start with a definition of terms with typefaces. Some of this stuff you're already familiar with. You've worked in Word before. You know, oh, I need to make something italic. So some of this is self-explanatory. Hopefully I'll give it a little bit more detail here. So we have three basic styles. We have the regular style, which is what the font generally looks like. We have the italicized style, which is the slanted over letters. And we have the bold version of the font. Each of these is used as a way of emphasizing or delineating one text versus another. The body might be in regular and your quotation might be in italics. It's a way of differentiating one piece of the text from another piece of the text. If you can, choosing from within the font family rather than just going to the edit menu and saying bold or italic can make a big difference. And I'll show you that in just a second. So right here on this slide, I have the operating system version in two sections here of the font. So on this upper one, we have the regular, we have the italics, we have the bold, and we have the bold italic going across. And below, we just have an italicized version. And so you look at this and you say, OK, that looks reasonable. However, if we pick from within the typeface family, so this is where the font designer, the person who created the font in the first place, said, this is what the italicized version should look like. This is what the bold version should look like. You'll notice that there's a really big difference in how those are seen. So if we look at the font family up top here, the regular obviously looks the same. Then we look at the italicized version. Look at the Z, for example. It's not just a slanted over Z. It has a little bit more style to it. It makes it a little bit easier to read, a little bit different. We move over into the bold version. In the bold version, we didn't universally make all of the strokes of the letters fat. We made some of them fatter. Look at the crossbar of the Z, for example. That's much fatter than the top. So the designer has taken time to create this font, the versions of this font, the styles of this font, to make it more readable, more enjoyable to work with. The next one down here at the bottom, subtly different. But that italicized version is a far more beautiful version than the operating system version. So you say, well, wait a minute, how do I get to these versions? Typically, this is in a font menu, you have a subset. So you have you'll go down, you'll choose your font, you go to Helvetica New, and then there'll be a subset of fonts, and you can pick from within there, rather than just going to regular font and then going over to the edit menu and saying, make this section bold. So if you can, it's always better to do that. Weight. Weight is about the relative lightness or darkness of the letters themselves, and that's generally marked by changes in the width or the stroke of the lines that make up the letters. So the thicker they are, the heavier those letters are, the darker those letters become. We have usually light, medium, and bold weights to a given font. Some fonts have a whole slew of operations or of weights to them. So in this case, we have thin, then we have extra light, light, regular, medium, semi-bold, bold, black, and super. So there's 9 different choices for weights within that one font family. So the more powerful a font is, the better designed the font is, the more variation you're going to have within the font family itself. Width refers to different variations within the typeface family. So you might come across something that's like condensed or compressed. You might have also come across something called extended. You might have decided that your English paper needed to be a little bit longer and you switched it into the extended version of a font. So I'm going to teach you guys today how you get around that and make your paper longer. So there is benefits to taking this class. So I will teach you how to do that without using something so obvious as using an extended font. So those are available to you. X height refers to the height of lowercase letters without ascenders or descenders. So it's essentially the height of an X. Pretty self-explanatory. So the X height is determined by the letter X, and it's different on different typefaces. So depending on what font family you're in, that X height is going to be a little bit different. It's going to change. So it's a useful way of comparing fonts. The cap height refers to the height of a capital letter. So we have the X height for a lowercase letter. The cap height is the height of a capital letter. The X height and the cap height vary by typeface. And that variance is going to be different depending on the font. So it's not always like this proportion of X height always means this proportion of cap height. They're going to change depending on what font you have. And so that's a useful way of comparing different fonts together. So let's look at it here. I think this makes it a little bit easier to see when we can look at it. So we have our X height. There's our X. Our height is from there to there. So we have our baseline right here, and we come up to the X height. Then we have our cap height right here. So we go from the baseline up to the cap height right there. The ascenders and descenders that I'm talking about, this is an ascender. It's going up. The descender is going down. So those aren't taken into account when we talk about X height or cap height. In this particular example, the cap height and the ascender height is a little bit different. Sometimes they're exactly the same. It depends on the font family itself. Counters are the white spaces that are located in and around the letter forms themselves. So you do the letter E, for example. The inside of the E, inside of the loop, has space to it. And so depending on how big these letter forms are, it's going to be easier or harder to read that particular letter. So it's a combination of the thickness of the font and how large it is. If you have a thin font that's really big, You have something called an open counter. You have a lot of space around the thin line. It makes it a little bit harder to read. The opposite is true if you have a bold font, really thick font, really heavy font at a small size. The counters get too small, and it's very hard to read. So they're both ways of getting hard to read, but it depends on the font. So let's look at an example. So obviously you can read both of these. But you can see that there's a lot of space around the letter forms relative to the thickness of the line up top. And at the bottom, it's really small here, and there's not a lot of space inside that E. The bolder that is, the harder it is to read. And so it's something to be aware of when you're starting to create some kind of a document. Small capitals. In some fonts, we have abilities to do this. It's a complete set of uppercase letters that are the same height as the X height, the same height as the lowercase letters. And this is really useful when you're using acronyms or you're writing something where you need to use capital letters, but you don't want to provide too much emphasis on those capital letters. If you want it to flow in the line of text, using these small capitals can be a big benefit. Lining and non-lining figures. And figures essentially are numbers. This is another example where when you're writing a paragraph of text, sometimes using big numbers are more difficult or are too emphasized relative to numbers that have ascenders and descenders. So lining figures or lining numbers are a set of numbers with the same width and height as full capital letters. Non-linings, numbers or figures, share the same X height, and they have ascenders and descenders. So let me show you an actual example here. I think it's easier when you see it. So our lining numerals are up top on the left here, and so we see that they have the full cap height and the full width of a normal capital letter. The non-lining numerals, on the other hand, have an ascender and a descender. So there's your little descender on the 3, there's your ascender on the 6. And if we look at them and we compare two paragraphs, so here's the two paragraphs that we're going to compare right there. If you look in them and you look, so here we go, the paperback edition is $15, discounted by 32% for $10.50. Those numbers stand out because they're the same height as a capital letter. If we look at the same text on the other line here, right, there it is, $15 discounted by 32% by Amazon, $10.50. That flows with the body of text much better. So we're not getting that big emphasis on those big numbers. We just flow in the process. So it depends on what font you choose and what your intended outcome is. Do you want it to flow in the body of the text, or do you want to draw attention to those numbers? Ligatures. These are specially designed characters. These are designed by the person who did the font in the first place when two letters combine. And so you guys, whenever you're writing, naturally do this. So my son's name, for example, is Bennett. It ends in two T's. So if I were writing out his name, I would naturally do that with the two T's. Right? That would be natural. Two lines, and I cross them both. I don't say, oh, there's one, and there's the other. So in a font, with these ligatures, the font designer will essentially do that. They'll do the two T's with one cross line. And automatically in the operating system, if the font designer has created this, when you type two T's, it will automatically replace that two characters with the one character that's combined. That's good design. Basically, ligatures replace letters that would otherwise collide or be awkward. Same thing as if you were handwriting it. So let's look at some examples. First one up there, the F and the I. The dot of the I and the top of the F are kind of awkward. So instead, you combine and you don't dot the I. So they've combined the crossbar with the I. FFI, I think that's a good one, or the FFL, where the first F gets a little bit smaller and collides with the second one. So they're subtle design changes, but good fonts are going to have these. The second row here are called discretionary ligatures. These are ones that the font designers sometimes do, but aren't really necessary. So for example, the S and the T, the top of the S connecting into the T, to me, I don't know. I think that's stretching it a little bit. However, part of the thing about discretionary ligatures is if you've ever typed in one of those script fonts, right, where you're doing like a wedding invitation or something and you have all those script, that's essentially they're relying on these discretionary ligatures to connect the swirly bits of text together. That's how it looks like cursive. So there's a bunch of these ligatures that are built into the font to allow you to write such that it looks like they're in cursive or in calligraphy or something. These ones down here, the contextual ligatures, these are really small. They're little tiny spaces between. They're little adjustments. So it's much harder to see the differences there. Choosing the right font. Typeface selection is one of the most important things that a graphic designer has to go through. You have to decide what font you're going to use on a particular design process. You want to think about what is the longevity of the piece. How long is this particular document going to stay in existence? Does it need to be trendy? Does it need to be something that's going to last forever? Let's say you're making a sign. I'm going to show you an example in a little bit. That's for some kind of a memorial or whatever. That's going to be around for a while. So what font you choose matters. What's the purpose of the piece? Is it something that's innovative? Is it something that's going to be outdated someday? Is it traditional or too conservative? All of those have to do with choosing the right font. So I love to pick on the Avatar font. This is Papyrus. Avatar came out, they used this font. Then guess what? Everybody started using the font. You saw it like for takeout. You saw it everywhere. People loved this font. It's ridiculous. It doesn't belong. It doesn't fit. You don't need to use Papyrus. It doesn't make you cool because you use Papyrus. Luckily, it's starting to fade out. So I was up in Tahoe. It was in August, and we were on a hiking trail, and I came across this. Some graphic designer came up with this. Why did you use Papyrus? Why? It's not relevant to anything that we're trying to do, bringing back the aspen trees. Now, I don't agree with some of the other fonts either. I don't like the heading font. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I don't like. But the fact that you randomly threw some Papyrus in there is like, come on. So now you're going to go around life and you're going to say, oh, Grant hates Papyrus. And you're going to start noticing it everywhere. Okay? It's just one of those things that bugs me because it's overused. So when you're choosing the font, you want to pay attention to why you're choosing it, and is it going to be like this where it just doesn't belong anymore? Anyway, sorry, I had to pick on that. Oops. It's being slow. Oh, come on. My iPad and my computer got out of sync. No, it doesn't. Hang on. All right, well, we'll just do it without the iPad. See, I'm still stuck on the Papyrus screen. Okay, let me make sure I'm back. Okay, here we go. So here's another example. This is a very subtle example from a design perspective. Okay, let's say that you were working on the Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens. You were going to do the publishing on that. You could use the basic font that comes in the computer, the Times New Roman. That's the one on the left. Or you could pick Bakerville, which is the one on the right, which was designed in the same country and around the same time as the Tale of Two Cities was written. So it's a subtle bit. Is somebody going to go in there and say, oh, wait a minute, Times New Roman, that's wrong. You really should have picked Bakerville. No. But it shows you as the designer have far more charisma or far more attention to detail than you otherwise would. And I think that's a good strategy when it comes to this sort of thing. Another example here with two fonts. And you can look at this and you can read it, and both are readable, but they're different. And so you as the designer have to decide which one is the right version, which one looks right for your intended design purpose. I just think this one's kind of funny. The periodic table of typefaces. It's kind of entertaining from the way that they're organized. I had to throw it in there for the fun of it. This one's also pretty fun. It's about choosing the right typeface. So you start in the center, and then you work your way out depending on what you want to do. Oh, I want to do a logo. Do I want a sans-serif or a serif? Oh, I want a serif. Then it's going to throw you over here. How does the word semi-sans or semi-serif sound? Good or bad? You say, oh, it's bad. Then it comes down here. Something new. Got serifs, got sans. Good, okay, come over here, and suddenly you get Federa. So you can kind of play around with that. It's pretty funny. If you do the book one, if I actually answered it honestly, I end up at the font I chose. That was coincidental, but Optima's there. That's the font that I use on all these handouts and whatever. And so Optima is a really good font because it's halfway between a serif and a sans-serif. It's really readable, but it's not quite a sans-serif. Anyway, I threw out the words serif and sans-serif a bunch in that last sentence. What's the difference between these two? Serifs are fonts that have little tiny tails on them. So we look over here at the example on the right. This is so hard because I can't draw on my stuff anymore. We look at the example here on the right, and we've got the little swoop on the bottom. And you say, OK, that's nice. Why do I care? Well, it does matter when it comes to reading blocks of text. So the sans-serif, without serif, translated, essentially doesn't have those little extra flares on the ends of the tails and on the ends of the letters. And so what happens is, if you're trying to read something and you want the text to be really small, having a serif makes it far easier to read. Go home, pick up any paperback book that you have laying around. Pick it up. It will be a serif font. Go home, pick up any magazine that you have laying around. Pick it up. It will be a serif font. Because they're trying to collect the information into a small amount as possible. Remember, let's use the magazine example. Okay? Every page that the magazine has to print costs money. So if you can condense the articles into a smaller footprint, you can either put more content in for the same price, or you can have fewer pages, which is going to cost the magazine less to produce, both of which are good from an economic standpoint. So we can have smaller text, and we can fit more into a page if we use a serif font, because it's easier to read than a sans-serif. We've seen an explosion of sans-serif fonts because online, if you're reading text online, fonts can be bigger. And that makes the sans-serifs, the ones without the tails, easier to read. There's no reliance on the number of pages. Let's say you were writing an article online. It doesn't matter how long it ends up. You just keep scrolling. So it doesn't cost you more to host that page because it has a little bit more text on it. So it's a very different place. So we can get away with sans-serif, and it can be a little bit bigger and a little bit easier to read. Here's two examples. The one on the left is a sans-serif font. The one on the right is a serif font. You can see that the sans-serif has to be a little bit bigger to make it the same. They're about the same in terms of being easy to read in this example. So you can show that there's subtle differences. Combining typefaces. This is one of the most important things you'll do as a designer when you're establishing your design in the first place. The easy thing is to stick within the same font family. So we pick a particular typeface, we pick Helvetica New, and we work within that font family itself. We use the bold version, we use the italicized version, we vary the sizes. Guess what? Everything goes together because it's all the same font. We didn't combine two fonts together. If we add multiple fonts together, obviously we get far more combinations. The trick, though, is how you combine those together. So here's an example, all in the same family. Bold heading, not bold for the text, the body of the text. If we want to combine the typefaces, we have to pay particular attention to how they combine their X heights and their letter widths. So the best font pairs are going to have the same X height and the same cap height and about the same letter width. So we have an example here, the Big Caslon and the Myriad Pro. If we look at the X height, and again, I can't draw on the screen because my iPad died on me here. But if we look at this X height is the same as this X height. The cap height is the same as that cap height. So the ratios are the same. So we can combine them together. The other thing when you're combining text together is you want to make sure you're picking a serif and a sans-serif. If you pick two sans-serifs and try to combine them together, they're going to be too similar to each other. So we always do a serif and a sans-serif. Sabon and Syntax, good examples. The truth is, if you want to figure out a good font pair, you can Google it. Say, show me good font pairs. And you'll come up with all the good font pairs. Makes it really easy. But you want to pay attention to what that combination is. So here we go. Here's another bunch of examples. And as we look at these examples, you compare the x height and the cap height for each pairing, and they're different one to the next, but within the pairing, they're the same. The x height ratio to the cap height ratio are the same. You can see it particularly down here at the bottom, where the x height is pretty large for both of these fonts relative to the cap height. Remember, of course, you can always use display and script fonts. I haven't talked too much about those just yet. Actually, I won't talk about them much at all in here because they're typically not for big, long paragraphs. What I mean by display and script fonts, these are the ones that are designed for kind of big graphic headlines, that sort of thing. You're not going to write your whole English essay in a script font that's hard to read, because your English paper would be returned to you like, what are you thinking? Legibility and readability. These are both essential for communication of your ideas and your passages of text. Legibility refers to the recognition of the individual letter forms and their relative position to the other letters. So this has to do with the letters themselves. Are they legible? Can I distinguish what the letters themselves are? Readability, on the other hand, is how the words and sentences flow together. How easy is it to read? So we've got individual letter recognitions is legibility. Readability is the words themselves, the sentences, the paragraphs. So I apologize, this is a little bit blurry, but I like the graphic because I think it makes this a lot easier to understand. So legibility, remember, is about the individual letter forms. So Arial, pretty easy to read, no problem. But if we use Mesquite, it's pretty hard to distinguish the individual letter forms. So it makes it hard to read. Can you read it? Sure. But you have to concentrate on what those letters are. Does that make sense? So that's about the letters. Readability is you want something that's easy to read as a sentence. So in this case, I'm not quite sure what the font was that they used there, but letter Gothic is kind of stretched out and not very enjoyable to read. Content, impact, or something bold would be good for a headline, but you certainly wouldn't want to read a whole paragraph in impact. Some of this stuff is obvious. Think about what your English professor would think if you turned it in that way. Context is also important. So you might use a serif font like Times New Roman for something financial. You would not turn in your big accounting paper in Comic Sans. Yeah?
Why is Comic Sans so taboo?
It's a good question. It's a very informal font, no surprise. And I think, I don't know, I can't speak for the absolutes here, but I think part of the reason that it's become taboo is because it's so used in the early education process. So if you think about first grade, second grade, third grade, all those teachers use Comic Sans all over the place. It's a very common thing for early education. And so because of that, by the time you get to this level, or by the time you get into the workplace or whatever, if you give somebody a document in Comic Sans, it's like, well, wait a minute, am I in first grade now? Because it's become such a commonplace thing in early education. That would be my assumption of how it became taboo. But you could ask different people and have different opinions about that. That's an opinion, not a fact. But it's a great question. Objective representation, this is clear, straightforward, established a hierarchy, easy presentation of information. So we've thought about the fonts, it's easy to distinguish what's important, etc. We'll talk a lot more about this next class. Subjective representation, this is the conceptual or interpretive. This is not quite as straightforward, heavily focused on an idea, creating some kind of an experience to the reading. Again, we'll talk about both of these in a lot more detail next class. Macro and micro perspectives. We'll start first with the macro perspective. This is the overall layout of the design, the format of the composition. What's the hierarchy? Where are the elements placed? How do they work together? So it's the big picture stuff. Micro perspectives. So we have macro, big picture stuff. Micro perspectives are the small things. The kerning, the spacing, the ragging, the little details. We'll talk about what kerning, spacing, and ragging are in a little bit. They ensure the clean, consistent presentation. So it's the little details and the big details. So you have to do both. Actually, the truth is the best designers are able to do both of those scales at once. And we could adapt this same thing into, say, architectural design. So the best buildings that are out there are the ones that have great big ideas. And when you come down to the corner of the building, it meets nicely. And the detail of the corner and how it meets the ground, all of those little things are well thought out and well designed, just like the big picture. So you always want to think big and small at the same time. I can't even read what this says, but it's really well done. I'm intrigued by it. I'd like to be able to read what it says. Symmetry and asymmetry. It's just like those that compositional technique when we talked about symmetrical composition in photography. Balance, harmony, asymmetrical, there's usually some kind of activity in motion. The piece that doesn't belong, that sort of thing. Alignment or ragging. This is the horizontal and vertical position of the text on the page. It's the visual relationships between the elements of design. So we think about how those things line up on a particular page. Typographic color. This is another important one to understand. And this is if you stood back in the back and you squinted at the page, how dark or light is a particular block of text? How dark or light is the element on the page? And so this, you have to kind of stand back to look at this and you kind of squint at it. And so in this particular example, if you were to squint at it, you could see which blocks of text stand out and which ones are lighter gray. And so you as the designer have control of that element. It's a subliminal thing. You're looking at your design. You want the text to stand out. Let's say you had a design where you had a line drawing on a particular page in your portfolio, and you had a really dark block of text. That's going to draw attention to the text rather than to the line drawing, because it's the darkest element on the page. So you want to squint at it, and you want to think about what's its relative gray value to the other things in your drawing or in your presentation. Do I want to overemphasize it? Do I want to underemphasize it? It makes a big difference. Type size. Again, very obvious. You've all worked through this before. It's measured in points. It's a 12-point font, that sort of thing. Changes in type size often result in a nice hierarchy of elements. If you did nothing else and you just created a ratio, my heading is going to be at 16 point, my subheading is going to be at 12 point, and my body is going to be at 10 point. And you just stuck to that. Same font, nothing more than that. That by itself is establishing a nice hierarchy for your design. Proportionate set of sizes is always important. Case, uppercase, lowercase. Lowercase letters are generally more readable than uppercase letters. Uppercase letters emphasize letter-to-letter recognition, which slows down the reading process and makes you concentrate on what's being written. So this is a good segue. Think about an architectural set of plans. Do architects write in all caps, or do they write in lowercase? They write in all caps. So why do they write in all caps? Because they want you to slow down and read what they have to say. Because of course architects know everything and they are in charge of everything, so therefore you should listen to what they have to say. It's customary, certainly, but it's also about this letter-to-letter recognition. Concentrate on what I have to say. I was exaggerating a bit about the architects. None of you seem to catch on to that. So I wanted to make sure that I told you they're not that egocentric. Well, some of them are. So, for example, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word appear. This is hard to read, right? Because we have to concentrate on the individual letters to try to decipher it. Try to read this one. For example, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word appear. The only important thing is that the first and last letter are in the right place. The rest could be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. See how much easier that is to read, even though it's totally messed up? Because our brains are conditioned to recognize the ascenders, the descenders, and the general form of a word. So letter-to-letter recognition versus lowercase lets us read more easily. If you turned in your English paper in all capitals, your English teacher would not be very happy. Kerning. This is just the space between individual letters. It's used to correct letter collisions or to adjust letters with too much space between them. The big ones are things like TY. And so you would naturally do this when you were writing. So you draw the T first, then the Y tucks under the top of the T. If we didn't adjust the kerning on this, the Y would appear after the top of the T. And so there'd be too much space between those letters. Now, are you going to go through your 12-page English paper and adjust kerning? No. It's too much work. But on, say, the title, or maybe a heading or a subheading, you might do it. Because that's a place where you can kind of distinguish it. So this is not something for the whole big document. It's something for the title. Something for a big label that we're going to make those adjustments. Tracking, on the other hand, adjusts the spacing between the words, the lines, and the paragraphs. So remember I told you that this class was valuable. That if you take nothing else away, when you need to make your English paper longer, this is where you do it. Because it doesn't extend just the font. It allows you to control the overall spacing of everything. So it just pulls it out nicely. So if you need it to be a little bit longer, you had to get to that third page, this is where you are. It also influences the typographic color. So you want something to turn out a little bit darker, you compress it. You want something to be a little bit lighter, you pull apart the tracking. And I'm going to show you how to do that in InDesign today as we go forward. Leading is the space between lines of text. So Word always did this as like single space, double space, 1.5 space, etc. But the truth is that leading is something that's variable and it's dependent on the font that you choose. So if you have a tall X height, you have a heavy typeface, or it's a sans-serif font, you're going to need more space between the lines of text to allow it to be more readable. Remember, readable is about the words, lines, and paragraphs, not the individual letter forms. Then, if you had shorter, lighter, or wider, and or serif typefaces. So you can compress it down a lot more. You can squish those lines together if you're using a serif typeface, because it's easier to read. You don't need the space around them. So this is an example of a portfolio. We're going to do portfolios. I'm going to show you lots of portfolio examples. However, I wanted to pull this one out because it has such beautiful typography in it. He's carefully considered this as the whole part of the design process. Where he's using uppercase letters, the size of the heading versus the size of the body. And you can get little senses for how he's going through. That's just nice. Has no fonts. The big bold text and how that fits in. So in the document itself, he's established this whole hierarchy for where certain fonts belong, how big they are, how bold they are, etc. And they follow through the whole document. And I think that's something that turns out really beautiful in a document like this. Another example here, these somehow turned out really blurry. But he's pulling, or she, depending on who, it's Megan, must be a female. She's pulling out this, and she wants you to see this quote and take time to read the quote. She's using all capitals there. Remember, it's slowing down the reading process. There we go. You can't even read that, but it's mixed case there. Okay, so I think most of you are here. So I'm going to stop the recording. I'll pass out the grade sheets. Then we'll switch over into InDesign, and I'll do that. But I want to do it while I still have the projector up so we can talk through it. All right, so we're going to keep going with exercise 110, the purpose of which is to go through typography within InDesign and understand what the options are and how we go about adjusting things like tracking and kerning and that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and open up InDesign. I've already logged in, so I'm ready to go. and I will go ahead and create a new document. For the first part, we're going to be using just a standard letter size document. So I have the letter size document selected. I am, however, going to pick and change the units. So I'll go into inches. If you don't, I'll remember to show you where to change that after the fact. And yeah, my standard orientation is just fine. I only need one page. That's fine as well. Under margins here, I am going to switch those to 0 because I don't need margins right now. And I'll ignore the bleed and slug for right now. We'll get to that a little bit later on in the class. I'll go ahead and click on the Create here. And there's my standard 8.5 by 11 document. It's ready to go. The inches are set. My margins are off the page. So I can go ahead and start creating my first document. Now, if you made a mistake and you picked the wrong units, by default, you can change those by right-clicking where the two rulers meet. And you can switch your units right there. It's pretty easy to switch if you happen to make the wrong thing. But when you're creating the document, the option's there, so you can go ahead and do that as well. So for the first part of this exercise today, we're going to use a Word file, which is available on the course website. If we go to today's exercise, there it is. You guys are going to download this Vitruvius 10 Books on Architecture, Chapter 1. It's a Word document file. I think I already have it downloaded, but I'll download it again for the sake of it. So this,
What is it under? Sorry.
it's under today's exercise, exercise 110. And you'll download that Word doc. And it's just like any other Word document. If you were to open it up, it would open up in Word. And there it is. So nothing too exciting about it. But this is showing you that there's a relationship between a Word document and InDesign. So you can actually do your typing and your creating of your English paper in Word. And then just like with a photograph, we can take that document and place it into a frame inside of InDesign. So we want to make sure that we save that Vitruvius file into our flash drive. I believe I already have it saved into today's folder. What are we on? 110. And there it is. So I'm ready to go. It's already on my flash drive. That's the way I want it. I'm going to go ahead and jump over into InDesign. And now it's time to start working with text and creating the text itself. So I have currently the Essentials workspace active, which is fine by default. But we're going to be dealing primarily with type today. So I'm actually going to change my workspace from Essentials to Typography. It brings up all the type tools. It gives us a lot more options here when it comes to typography. That's good. And we'll start working from there. So I switched my workspace into Typography. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and create a text box using the type tool. It doesn't matter whether I create the text box with the type tool or I create an open frame. I can do it with either one. And I'll show you this as an example. So I have this first option here. This was the type box. The second option here was an open frame with nothing in it. I can work with either one. When it comes to placing my document, my Word document, I want to choose where I want it to go. So we'll pick this one, for example. And I'll go up to File and then Place. Same thing we did with an image. Only this time I'm going to pick my Word document instead. There it is. And I'll go ahead and say Open. And it will drop the text right into that text box. In this particular case, it's telling me that I'm missing some fonts, which we'll solve in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and click on Close for right now. And you can see it placed in. The alternative to that would be to use the frame. So I have the frame here. I can do the same thing with the frame. I can go to File and then Place. I can take the Word document and I can place that right into that frame as well. So it doesn't matter whether I'm creating an open frame or whether I'm creating a type box. Either one will get us to the same place. So one of the big advantages with working with text in InDesign is if I were to resize this box, the text will automatically resize within the box. Likewise, if I were to shrink this box up, the text would continue behind it. Or if I made that box get bigger, the text continues along the way. Now, if we look at this, let me bring it back up to here, for example. You see in the lower right corner of this text box, there's a little red plus sign. That means there's more text in this text box than can fit within the text box. So I'm going to need to make my text box bigger, shrink the font down, or add some more text boxes. So in this scenario, I can go on and create another frame or another text box. It doesn't matter. I'll do one with a frame and one with a text box. All right, so I have a frame and I have a text box. Now, if I go back to this first one right here, and I'm using the black arrow to do this, if I click on that little plus sign, that red plus sign, you'll see that my cursor gets loaded up with some text, and I can see a little preview of that text. I can then move on to one of these other text boxes, one or the other, and I can actually click on it, and it will continue the text into that box. Likewise, I can click on this little plus sign, and I can continue the text right into that box. So the text flows through here, then it goes into this, then it goes into that. Now, if I adjust the text box, let's say, oh, you know what, I wanted this one to be a little bit smaller. Look, the text continues to follow through. So the advantage here, because it's a referenced file, is as I work with the text, I don't have to think about, well, how much text went in one box, and let me copy and paste it into another. It just flows right through the boxes to make it easy. So our purposes today, we're only creating one page of this, but you can tell that it continues on for multiple pages. The same strategy exists for multiple pages. I could create the next page and just chain the text right into that page. If I went back and made a change to my Word file, I can replace the link to that Word file, or I can update the link to the Word file, and it'll update the text as well. So thus far, my font came in. It's highlighted in this pink. Well, actually, you guys can't even see the pink, can you? It's highlighted in pink because the font that it came in was not available on this particular system. I created the Word file on my Mac. The font I had wasn't the same as the Windows version, etc. So I either need to replace the fonts, or I need to choose a new font. So the easiest strategy would be to double-click to get within one of these text boxes, press Control-A to select all. That would select everything. And then I'll go up to the ribbon at the top of the page here, and I can switch my font into any one of the other fonts that are available. And so you can kind of see as I scroll through this, it'll preview all the various options that are available to me. Okay? You can see some of these fonts have a little caret next to them, a little triangle next to them. Those have variants within the font family. So some of these have bold and italicized versions. This is what I was talking about, where we have, so here's an example for this Bodoni. Within the font family, we have a compressed, condensed, condensed italic, condensed bold italic, regular italic, bold italic, black, black italic. Within that font family. So I can work within the font family to create my variants. Okay? So let's say that I wanted, no, that's too ugly of a font. I can't do that. All right, this one will work. So let's say I pick this Corbel font. Okay, so now it's all been changed. You guys can't really see it very well. That's a good thing. So we'll need to make some adjustments so that you guys can see this a little bit better. So it's one thing to go in and say, OK, I'm going to select this particular paragraph, and I'm going to say, you know what, instead of being light, I want it to be regular. Great. Yeah, now you guys can see it. OK, that's good. We can always adjust an individual piece of text. We select the text. We can make that adjustment. Let's make that one bold. Let's take this set of text, and let's make that one regular. And you can see I can work my way through that way. The thing about doing it that way is that we have to select the text and make those changes to it. The alternative would be to create something called a character style for this particular object. And so I'm going to have my cursor in this. I've done this first paragraph the way that I want it. I'm going to have my cursor inside that paragraph. I'm going to come over here on the right, and I'm going to go to the Character Styles menu. I should also point out the Character menu here is essentially what you get at the top of the page. That's just the shortcut to it. The character tells us information about the character itself. We'll go through what these options are in just a second. But with the Character Styles menu, I can choose to essentially save this style to be able to reuse it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a character style. There it is. I'm going to double click on it, and I'll say body. And so what I can do with that body style is all I have to do is select the next paragraph. We'll go ahead and do all of them there. And I'll click on body, and it will adopt, well, it's supposed to adopt the settings of the body character style, which it didn't. So let me go in and adjust the body character style. I'm going to double click on it there, which is going to bring up the character style options. We'll go into basic character options, and I'm going to choose regular as my basic character options. It should have done that by default. And it's doing a terrible job at doing what I want it to do. There we go. It just hadn't applied yet. The advantage of using a character style is that if you decide you didn't like the style that you have. So in this case, you know what, that body paragraph isn't quite dark enough. I can go in, I can double click on the body character style, and I can say, you know what, I want all of that to change from regular to, I don't know, bold italic. I'm doing something extreme so you can see it happen. When I say OK, it will change all of the paragraphs with that character style applied. So you can make edits to the style and have it applied to the whole document. On a single page like this, does it really matter? No. But let's say we had a 10-page English essay or a history essay or whatever. Would you want to go through and make those changes? Not necessarily. So I'm going to go ahead and switch that back. I'll double click on body. I'm going to go back to my basic characters, and I'm going to change it back to regular. I'll say OK. And that then changes it all back as a style.
Almost like CSS.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a CSS style sheet for this. So let me go in and explore some of the other character options so that we can see this. I'm going to zoom in here, up here on the top, so we can play around with a few variables. So right here, this is my heading, or maybe chapter 1 is my heading. This is my subheading. But if we open up that character window here, it's currently in the font, and it's bold. My size is available right here. Currently, it's at 16. I could control the size of the font right there. I can use the up and down arrows. I could type in. I could even do a half size, so I could do 18 point. Oops. I could do 18.5, for example, and have it be a little bit bigger, so it doesn't have to be a round number. There is a drop-down menu of the standard sizes that people tend to use. So we'll leave it at 18 for right now. Below that, this is the kerning. So this is that space between the characters. And so in this case, the space between the A and the R probably needs to be adjusted a little bit. The R needs to get closer to the A. So I can come over here, and there's a drop-down that controls how far or how close these particular pieces are. So we could say, oh, let's make it a little bit closer. Let me exaggerate it here so you can see. And I can pull those two characters closer together. We don't have to rely on the drop-downs. I could just type in a value, -50, for example, puts those two closer together. So that's the kerning. That's in between individual letters. It works by selecting the space between the letters and then adjusting the kerning from the menu. Yeah?
Do you have to do them all individually? Like if you have multiple A's and R's next to each other?
You would do them all individually.
Okay.
So it's a very specific, and that's why I was saying you're not going to do it for the whole document. You're going to do it just for the heading, for just those pieces. In this case, I might not have done it for any of these because they're close enough. The A and the R, right now they look too close together. We could get into some fine details. I think if I took this one and I put it back at 0, it feels pretty reasonable in terms of spacing, so I'd probably go with it. But that's where you would adjust it if you wanted to. It's far more, let me get rid of that link. We don't need the link there. If I was doing like the TY like that, see how the Y and the top of the T are essentially in line? That would be a place where I'd take this and I'd shrink. Oh, it did it by default. Excellent. It already shrunk it over a little bit, but I could pull that back just a little bit more so that they overlapped. If they were not doing it at all, there you go. Now you can see where they're in a line. So it's important to notice it for some of them. It looks like InDesign already was aware that the T and the Y should have some overlap, so it put it in by default, which is even better. So that's where our kerning is. Next over here, this is the space. Is it the space between? That should be in the paragraphs. What is this one?
Between two lines of
yeah, but that should be in paragraph adjustment, not here. Well,
that's for the whole paragraph.
Yeah, but it should be in the paragraph. It should be in here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll come back to that one in a second. Sorry. OK, so we have that. Now this one down here, this is the tracking. This is the one I was telling you about if you needed your English paper to be a little bit longer. So this is the one to pay attention to, right? So if I took this particular paragraph, and notice I selected the whole paragraph, and I came over here to the tracking, and I said, OK, let's increase it by 5. And it stretched it just a little bit. Let's increase it by 50. OK? It's doing the whole paragraph. It's not stretching the letters. It's between all the letters, get a little more space. Between the spaces, you get a little bit more. And before too long, the whole thing gets a little bit longer. Does that make sense? So doing it at 50 is probably a little bit much. Oops. Might be a little bit much. So you might end up doing it at less than that. Let's try 25. It's a little bit more reasonable. So in that scenario, it gave us an extra line out of the text. Notice, though, that does change the color, the typographic color of this particular paragraph. So if I change that tracking and I went up to, say, 100, and we squinted at it, this is much lighter than this one. There's a little bit more space in that paragraph. So it's certainly something to be aware of as you work through this. OK, we can change the height of an individual letter. So let's say we wanted that letter to be taller. We can come down here to change the letter height, and we can make that one particular letter taller if we wanted to. It's just stretching the letter. Likewise, we could change the width of that particular letter to be wider if we wanted to. It's by percentage. So in this case, I went 200% and 200%. It doubled in size. Something that's available should you need or want to do it. Let me go back to 100 and 100. Sometimes you want to make a number or a letter that's a superscript or a subscript. So I could take this and I could raise it up so that it's up above. Now in that case, it doesn't make much sense to make the T up. But let's say that I put a 2 in and I wanted that to go up. So we could do the education of the architect squared, for example. That's how we would go about doing it. We can also slant a set of letters. So this is essentially creating your own italicized version. Again, not something I would encourage you to do, but it is available there as a transformation should you want to do it as well. All of these character settings are available in the character styles menu. So if I went back to body and I double-clicked, we have our basic character formats. There's all of that stuff, the kerning, the tracking, etc. So I can do it all from the character style options as well. So those are characters and character styles. Next thing we're going to deal with is the paragraph and paragraph styles. I'm going to come down here and work with this paragraph right here. In that scenario, we'll open up the paragraph menu here, and we have a variety of options available to us. So as we look at the paragraph, across the top here are our ragging options, or our justification options. Sometimes they refer to it that way. This first option is our standard justification, which essentially means we have a ragged edge on this side of our column. If we do this next option, it's going to center all of the text within our text box. If we do the right option, it's going to be justified to the right with the ragged edge on the left. Next thing we have here would be justified with the last line aligned to the left. So essentially, the paragraph is always going to fill the space from one to the other, and the last line here is going to end justified to the left. This one here would be justified with the last line being centered. This one here would be justified with the last line being to the right. So again, different options depending on what you're trying to do. So you can play around with those options there if you want to. We also have the ability to choose to hyphenate or to not hyphenate. So hyphenate means that you can break the word at the syllable so that it wraps onto the next page. That may or may not be something that you want as an option. So it's just a checkbox there. Now as we come down in here, we get to some more other details. So for example, do we want to push the left indent for the whole paragraph over? So I could say, OK, I want the whole paragraph to be indented to the left here. Do I want the first line? Let me put that one back at 0. Do I want the first line of the paragraph to be indented? Those are, again, options that are available. Do I want to indent the whole paragraph from the right? So I want to pull that over from the right. That's an option. You can actually indent the last line too. I'm not quite sure why you want to do that, but it is available as an option. If you wanted, let me get this back to 0 here. If we wanted the first line to go backwards in that particular paragraph, we would indent over, and then we would indent the first line in a negative direction. It would end up in that configuration. So depending on what you're trying to create, that might be what you're after doing. OK, the other thing that we can do is we can change the first letter. Let me switch these back to 0. Sorry, I have to do it in order. I have to change the first line, and now we're back. So in this scenario, I can also choose to take the first character, or 2, or 3, or 4, and have that expand to multiple lines. So I could say, OK, I want the first character, which in this case would be the number. I want it to take up 2 lines. I love it when I try to do things and they don't do it correctly. Oh, sorry. I did it backwards. This is the number of lines here, and this is the number of characters. So in this case, I could say I want just the number, and then it starts there. This is bad. These are non-lining figures because we have a descender on there, so it's a little bit harder to do it with the number. I'm going to delete that for just a second so you can see it with just a character. So we could have that take up, there it is in 1. I could have it take up 3 lines, 4 lines, etc. Sometimes this is where this might change its font. We might do some kind of Old English or something. Right? So we could do that. You guys have seen this done on pages before. So we can control how many lines it takes up and how many letters or characters it takes up. So again, another set of options. So if I wanted to be able to repeat this, I need 2 things. One, I need a character style for the first letter, and I need a paragraph style that would save this configuration. So notice that we have, under paragraph, we also have paragraph styles. So I'm going to leave my cursor in the paragraph here. I'm going to go to paragraph styles, and I'm going to create a new style. There it is, paragraph style 1. And we can call this Old English paragraph. Perfect. So now I would be able to pick another paragraph and put the Old English paragraph on it, and it would do the same thing with the first letter taking up multiple lines. Now, in this case, the number didn't match the Old English font. So that's where I would need a character style. So I'll come back to the Old English here. I'll go to character styles. I'll create a new character style. There it is. And we can call this first letter. There it is. Now I could take the first letter here and apply the first letter character style to it. And that's going to happen on all subsequent paragraphs where that's applied. If I didn't want to do it with the number, for clarity purposes, I could get rid of that and then apply it to the T. There it is, the first letter style. Okay, so I did it here and I did it here. Now, if I decided I didn't like the font, I could go back to my first letter. I could go to basic character format, and I could change to a different font if I wanted to, and that would change both of them to a different font. So we're saving the paragraph style, and we're saving the character style. Now, if I could go into the paragraph style here, and I could make adjustments to the character style, or the paragraph style. So a couple things to be aware of when it comes to character and paragraph styles. Character styles are specific to just the character. A paragraph style can have an embedded character style within it. So I could set up a paragraph style and also adjust things like basic character formats. If I'm not mistaken, and I'd have to go back and double check this, the character style will override the character style within a paragraph style if you wanted it to. So in terms of order of priority. Though typically I just say keep them separate because that'll keep your things organized for you. You know where to make adjustments. So here we go in our paragraph style options. We could come in here and we could say, let's see here, bullets and numbering. We could add a bullet point list if we wanted to and set that up so that it was showing up. We could actually number a particular list. Let's see, here's our justifications. And we can work through any one of those options. So all the same things that I set up before I created this paragraph style, you can go through and make those edits as well. I'm going to go ahead and say, OK. I think for me, the easiest way of setting this up is to create the paragraph and to make the paragraph look the way you want it to, and then create the style for it. And then you can apply that style to the rest of the paragraphs in your document. So it's easiest to do it visually first, then create the style for it. And that's just a personal preference. OK, so those are paragraph and character styles. Now the next thing that people tend to like to do when it comes to working with a document with text in it is they like to bring in pictures. So I can take this frame. I can drop the frame in somewhere. It's right over the top of my text. And I can place an image into this frame. Let me go to File and then Place. And I'm going to need something from like last class or something. So let's see here. We'll use that image from last class. There it is. Same things apply here. Right-click, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, and there's my image. Notice that right now, the text goes behind this image. We can adjust that by selecting the image, and then over here on the right side we can click on Text Wrap. And this is going to control how the text interacts with the image itself. So we could say we want to wrap around the object, which is going to automatically adjust the text based on where the object is. If I were to move the object, the text is going to go, in this case, it's wrapping on both sides of the text. I can choose to make the text break with the object. So I could say I want to break it so that we get one line, then the image, then the text continues. Depending on the object itself, I can choose to wrap it closely around the shape versus give myself a little bit of space around the object. This first option is no text wrap, which means that the object is on top of the shape itself. Unfortunately, I put this behind there. Come on over there. There we go. OK, so that text wrap allows us to wrap around. Sometimes you want to adjust what the margins will be. So in this case, I'm wrapping the object here. Let me put this over a little bit closer to the edge of the page. There it is. This one needs to go back this way just a little bit. Let's lay it out. Good. I want to control how much space is mandated between this edge and my image. I can do that using these margins right here. So I could say, OK, I want the space. Sorry, I have to be on the object itself. I want the spacing to always be 1/4 of an inch. And you see that we get this little outer boundary, and so the text can be no closer than 1/4 of an inch. I could say I wanted that to be 1/8 of an inch. And you can see that this allows us to get a little bit closer to the image. So we've got flexibility there. You can choose to chain them all together so that they're all the same, or you can undo it and have different margins on the top and the bottom, depending on your object. OK? So that has to do with working with an image and putting that in and causing the text to wrap around your image. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. Perfect. The other thing I want to point out to you is that there are lots of free fonts available online that can extend what font choices you have available. Google actually has a whole list of fonts that you can work with. So you can go to Google Fonts, and they have a bunch of fonts that you can choose to use. If you find one that you like, we can click on it. There it is. And somewhere, I have to select the font. There it is. And these are designed for you to embed in a web page, but we can download the font itself. So there it is. We can show it. Let me extract it. And if I'm not mistaken, in Windows 10 in these versions, we can actually install it directly into the operating system. We used to have to download a font viewer to be able to do this, but I think, yeah, we can temporarily install it. There it is. And so now I could go into my document here. And that was, there it is. And I can choose that particular font. So anywhere online, you can find fonts and you can use those. It starts to extend so you're not stuck with just the fonts that are available in the operating system. There are certain fonts that I use on my computer that I've found and or purchased online to kind of extend what I'm looking for or what I'm trying to do with my design. There's a couple other websites. I think Font Squirrel is one. And they have a bunch of fonts that you can work with there as well. Again, all downloadable. So there's lots of options that are available to you, and you can download those in. So under part 2, I talk about this temporary thing that you have to install. You don't have to do it on these computers anymore. They fixed that. So under part 3, you're going to be creating a word art collage. So if you do a Google search for word art or an image search, you can see lots of examples. I'm not going to ask you to do one that's complicated like this or like this, but this is what I'm talking about. They don't even have to be in a basic shape, but it's a good experimentation on how you combine fonts together and how you work with type, etc. Here's one that doesn't have a shape behind it, but it has lots of words. I'm going to ask that you do this as a self-reflective word art. So this is about you. So you come up with adjectives that describe you, and you combine them together. That's under part 3. So you can see lots of examples here, and you can do a Google search and you can find all of those. Okay? You're going to do that under part 3. When you're done, you're going to save your work as an InDesign file. So we're going to post both the Vitruvius and your word art in the same one post. So when you're done, you'll go to File and then Save. This will save the InDesign file. It's a .indd file. Let you go back and edit the file afterward. Then you're going to go to File and then Export. You're going to change from the Adobe PDF print down to JPEG. You'll give this a name and click Save. Then this Export JPEG comes up. We talked about this last class. The quality is going to be maximum, and the resolution here is going to be at 300. Otherwise, everything's going to be blurry when you do that export. And then when you're done, you'll go ahead and click on Export, and you're good to go. So you're going to have the export of the word art, and you're going to have the export of your Vitruvius. Both things in one post for today under exercise 110. Okay? Any questions? No? I'll let you guys start.